Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Rabbit Trail Podcast, the podcast where we chase the truth wherever it runs, starting with the sermon that we had last Sunday at Olive Branch Community Church and flowing forward from there. And we're just going to have all kinds of fun conversations with my friends. This is episode number 170.
170.
Yes. And it's still not right. But we are excited that you're joining with us for these first 4 minutes. And we hope that you'll enjoy this part of the conversation and the rest as we dive into that message. My fellow rabbit chasers, why don't you guys say hi, Robert and George?
Yeah, you're George now. Hello, everybody. I'm not Robert. My name is Stephen Oldham. I'm the local outreach pastor here at Olive Branch. We just want to thank you for watching or listening. Let us know how you're watching or listening. We'd love to know just the format that you're using. But I just want to say, please, if you like anything, even if it's a clip or anything, share it with somebody you like. That way we get the word out there. People start liking the podcast. And we just thank you for engaging us at the church. But if they have questions, what are they supposed to do?
Wow.
George.
If you have questions, whether they be theological ones or life situation questions, and you want our perspective on it or scriptural perspective, then email them to rabbittrail@obcc.church, rabbittrail@obcc.church. Why are you laughing?
I just thought, like, you're like, if you want a scriptural, email some other podcast, just like that. You paused with your normal witty pause. I was like,
to Wes Huff at.
Yes, if you want good, wise, then we can give you some other ones as well. So my name is Brent Branchot. I am the Connections Pastor here at Olive Branch. And again, we would love to hear your questions, your comments, and your feedback. So we do have some questions that we'll get to today.
Yep.
And
I forgot to introduce myself, I guess.
Who are you?
My name is Greg Harris. And I'm the senior pastor at the sponsoring church called Olive Branch. And I didn't preach the message this week. So
none
of us did.
Yeah. That was all Ricky, all the time. So thank you, Ricky.
All three.
Appreciate you, man. So it's cool to have somebody who's not a actually paid pastor kind of try to grow in their chops and preach. So we're gonna try to jump off of his comments and thoughts. So let's do this, right? What was it called?
Yeah. It was
Great and United.
What?
Covered in this today is covered in the dust. Great and united is the name of the message.
Great and united.
Yeah, that's what it said.
Great. That's a very humble message. Great. So
great message.
So and I just appreciated Ricky. I didn't know it, but before he went up to preach first service, I was talking to him and praying for him and asking him how he felt, and realized he just went through a very difficult week, with some things that went on in the family, death of an uncle, and so to get up there and keep going and keep plugging away, building the message even up to that point.
That was rough.
Amidst all that chaos that was going on in his life, hand it to Ricky, and it's just it's just a reminder, when you're in ministry,
Sundays keep coming like electric
coming.
poles on a Texas highway. That's how they used to talk about it. Just
but granted, it's one thing, if you're on staff and you push through a lot of the chaos and difficulties that you're going through in order to deliver a message, it's another thing if you're a volunteer as well. And so Ricky, if you're listening, I just really appreciated your heart and everything else, and your diligence in going through that. So
that's really mean. I mean, to do that for your joke section, that's just wrong. I think you should apologize.
That was not a joke
at all.
But I mean, for me, that our household has been crazy. We have had family, up to 8 people staying at our house for the last 2 weeks. And
you have a Brenton breakfast.
It's busy. Yes, we have a free B&B at our house. People just call us up and go, "We're coming." It's like, okay,
Brent's bread and bed and breakfast. You say that fast 10 times.
And so you got this house full, so you run out and you buy all these groceries, and then you're running around and you're busy and you're eating out, and then you come back to your refrigerator and go, "Okay, let's throw a bunch of this stuff out because it's gone bad and it's wasteful." And so I'm like, we need to make a list. And so I realized that that one thing I'm really getting good at is making a thorough shopping list
Mm-hmm.
and then leaving it on the kitchen table when I go to the store, and then try to remember what was on that list. So, that is my new game.
That's a fun game. It's
It
called
is.
Memory.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And it might help use my brain so it doesn't just fade away with Alzheimer's. So
Mine's just finding my keys, so it doesn't matter what the list says. I might have it in my pocket, but if I can't drive down there, it doesn't matter.
True story. True story. This Sunday, I'm walking outside. I'm not preaching, so I'm like, what is going on? I'm hearing this water hit just on my window in my office. I'm like, what is going on here? Walk outside. The sprinklers are going off in the middle of like people coming to church between services, and it's like spraying cars because one of them's like busted open. I'm like, what is going on? So I hightailed it over to where we keep our
shut up.
it's our box that monitors our controller for our sprinklers. And so I got to get in there, unlock it, and I just undo and I shut the door and I go find our Jim who runs our buildings and grounds, and I let him know, hey, we got to change the head. And I'm like, I try to go back inside. I'm like, where are my keys?
Oh, this is not a building.
I legitimately set them down in the closet, locked my keys in the closet, and walked away. And so I had to get Jim's keys, get my keys out, and I came back to get Jim, and I lost Jim. It was like I hunted for him like 10 minutes. I'm like, here's your key. I'm done. I'm done for the day. So yeah, it was quite a game of memory for myself too. So
I don't feel so bad.
I will say I
forget things all the time.
I used to lose my keys all the time, and I just gotten to a point where I put them in the same place. So they're only in 3 places now, and they're either in my drawer, they're on the end table by the couch where I sit, or they are still attached to my jeans because I've got a little hook. And so I have not lost my keys in forever. Knock on wood. So
I put a tracker on my keys.
yeah. Oh
Yeah.
And you still lose them?
I still lose them in the house. I just have to look at the tracker.
Yeah.
totally thought, Brent, you were going to say I have 3 places. One in the little dish, one on my pants, and the other one is anywhere in the house. So,
So do we have any first impressions?
Yeah, we can go. There's only one really. Well, there's 2. Well, we'll go with the first one on the list. It's 5 days ago, and we were talking about theology in the Bible in school. Is it required? And this person goes, ancient myths, modern brains still believe. So it's just a mind-blown comment. Like, you
What
guys
does that
still,
mean? Ancient myth, modern minds.
modern brains still believe. So it's not even minds.
does a brain believe anything?
Well, that's the question, right? They would say yes if you're into the human position, like you're just a brain, you don't have a soul.
I would advise all of you to go back to Sean McDowell's podcast and watch where he interviews the neuroscientist, because they've never stimulated a belief when they've stimulated the brain. So can a brain believe anything? That's an interesting question. Yeah, just like, does my computer really believe anything, or does my computer just compute
Process
things?
information.
So
I do think that, like, if you just look at the state of human affairs, the one thing that we removed as part of the discussion is morality in schools. So it's probably a good idea to go back and study the most influential book in human history. So the Bible, which would be theology and the Bible. So even if you're not a believer, I think if you don't study it, then you don't understand where the culture came from.
Not to mention, I think that we should bring back an aspect of God, even in a secular culture, because, look, there's more evidence to the existence of a God, even on a naturalistic conception, than there is not naturalistic, that's impossible, but, on a secular concept of looking at science and things, than there is against it. And I think that's the silliness, like, that kind of propagates. And here's the thing, pragmatism doesn't help. There's no good naturalistic explanation to the simple question, why do I need to learn this? Like, why would we teach naturalism in a school when it can't even answer the basic question every kid asks, why do I need to learn this? In Christianity, the answer is, because we're actually learning about truths of a reality that are beyond us. There's a God who created it. And I do think that naturalism struggles with that answer. They give a pragmatic answer, at which point kids go, well, I'm not going to do that in my future. Why do I need to know that? To other kinds of issues. And it kills wonder, and it kills awe, and it causes issues. But that's why that comment
The other
is
one, though,
odd to me.
so I was listening to, we don't have to go too far on this, but one of the responses, pushbacks to people saying, God created the universe is, oftentimes people will think something that's spiritual, they dive into it with science, and then we discover that it's something scientific. And so perhaps we just keep going back until we don't really need a God. We just keep exploring things, and it keeps giving us information. What would you say to something like that? That's kind of what a Neil deGrasse Tyson would say. He's
Yeah,
like
I would
the
say
God of the gaps. Like, you're just putting God in things that we
Yes,
don't know.
We would call that when you hit the beginning of the universe, which is the totality and sum total of all things science can examine. You are now doing science in the gaps. He has more faith in a process than he does in a philosophy or a logic at that point. And now he's leaning on a philosophy that he has evidence against. I would argue that, sure, you can believe that, but given all that we have right now, and we can continue to pursue, why does it keep pointing further and further towards the idea of a God and not away from him? Like the fine tuning, the beginning of the Big Bang. Even if you pull multiverse concepts in, the fine tuning of the multiverse is such that it still needs a fine tuner. There's all of these issues that keep pushing it back. Not to mention, you don't have foundations for science in the first place. If
Personalness?
Well, I feel like what they're saying is, look, we discovered it was written by an AI. See, there was no person involved. And you're like, doesn't the AI need a person involved to create it? And that's how I feel about multiverse arguments and these kinds of things. Like, oh, we keep digging in, we'll discover what really made. Well, even if you discover what made that? Like,
it's a yes and, right? It's a yes and. You're saying, like, I understand that it's complex. It used to be people just were okay with the simplicity of it, and they made false assumptions about the science. But it wasn't like that wasn't true in the sense of there's some kind of spiritual thing to this. But that's not the only answer. But you can look at something and keep understanding something, and it still points to a design. So the more you look at something, the more you look at a design instead of just looking at the thing. Mm-hmm. So I think like a lot of times science is just looking at the thing and not the reasons why it exists.
Well, and then the objection to that is, well, hold on a minute. We're just design identifying brains that we like to see patterns. And so there's not really a design there. You're just thinking there's a design. At which point I go, well, isn't that the same thing? Aren't you just creating a pattern in your own brain? So why would you even trust that pattern that you're saying? This is actually the problem that that philosophers have talked about, is like, if your brain is made from random things, then what you're getting is random firings of neurons and random firings of all kinds of electrons. And why would you trust any random thing giving you true information about anything?
Yeah.
At which point you have no reason to trust your own brain. At which point you don't have any reason to trust science. And it's this bad cycle that destroys the ability to actually do learning. So
I just think people think ancient myths and modern brains, and they prefer the modern. And I'm saying there are things about the ancient world that are still good, and there are things about the modern world that aren't the most perfect. And so I think just studying from people, whether they're modern or ancient, to find out what they think, feel, and believe and what's true is important. So I don't just dismiss things because they're ancient and they must be stupid. Or I don't just accept things that are modern just because they're new. And so that's my concern for someone who thinks in the modern. You have a very short memory of history. But that's just one comment. His mind's blown, but my mind's blown about that as well. This is from a guy called Professor Boomer. Professor Boomer says, from your short, husbands, love your wives like the church, like the Christ loved the church, which is just an aside you had in a message 1 of our series on, was it Follow My Dust?
It's just, covered in dust.
Covered in dust. So that was number 1. And it says, you're talking about husbands abusing the verse to say you're supposed to obey me because the Bible says you're supposed to obey me. And so he says, in other words, I can't explain certain verses that contradict my narrative, but I simply distract you by bringing up the verse that ambiguously supports my narrative. So he's commenting on the preaching style, I guess. So
I think it probably just he didn't watch the whole totality of the sermon, where I was literally using that as an example of what people do with the scriptures to use it for their own power and their own ideas. You, a wife, you need to submit. So when a husband says that, but doesn't understand the context that he's supposed to serve her unambiguously to the point of death, like Jesus for the cross, like those two things are in context of each other, and literature is understood within the context and confines of its own statements. So I would say he's guilty of taking me out of context first. Second is then taking the text out of context twice, that those two things are locked together and inform each other. And I'm not taking the narrative in a direction I didn't want. I was taking it directly in the place I needed, which was don't say things for God when you're misusing his word. And that's the idea there. Don't use this as a weapon when that's not what it was intended for as a husband.
It's the lack of understanding of the text, not an understanding of the text. You're not just picking and choosing. Though I would say there may be other religions that's the way their text might work. I'm not sure, but I think the common person doesn't understand what you've studied, which is, hermeneutics. And
yeah, remember we went back, way back, we have a debate.
The debate with
these scientists, atheists, free thinkers, and we're like, there's a scientific way we study the scriptures. It's called hermeneutics. And they looked at us like we were from another planet. I was like, what? You've never heard of this? Like, what are you talking about? Like, we don't take this like a magic text. Literally, we have an entire process that we work through to come to a conclusion about what the text means.
From its ancient context and how to apply it to a modern setting.
I mean, the sociologist over there was like, oh, we're just grunting and groaning at each other. I'm like...
Well, she even said we mimic from what we've been taught, and that's it. I'm like, you haven't been to church. I mean, some people might do that, but that's not how we study Scripture.
Right.
So
it's weird.
Anyway, those are the only two comments this week. But
All right. Back to you, Brent.
All right. So we are going to get into the sermon. We're in the Covered in Dust series, and this one was Great and United. And so it was Mark 9, chapter 9, verses 30 through 50. So if you wanted to read that and get a sense of what the sermon was about, the passages. But in talking about that as well, one of the things he mentioned was it was like his first point on the program was take the time to know Jesus personally, right? What is the context of what he said there? Do you remember? I'm trying to. It made sense to me when I wrote it down.
Well, what's going on is they're walking. So the disciples have come down from Mount
Hermon. That's in my study comments too. Most people do assume it's Mount Hermon.
Yeah, and so now they've traveled back down through Capernaum, and so when they went on from there and passed through Galilee, which is a territory, it's not a specific like city, it's a territory. I think we should be saying things like when they passed on through the territory of the Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching disciples, saying to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered. Ricky was making the point that at this time, this is a personal moment, that he's not out preaching in general. He's brought them together to speak about his crucifixion, his coming death and burial and resurrection in a very personal conversation. So he's getting to this as like, look, this is personal. And then it comes to the next part where they get into Capernaum. They've traveled through, they've landed Capernaum, where all the miracles and stuff happened. And he says, when they got to the house, he then turns around and has another personal conversation. What were you guys discussing? So he takes the very personalized aspect that this wasn't corporate and broad teaching about his coming death, burial, and resurrection, but very personal and specific.
Mm-hmm. And then they were like denying it. No,
that was earlier. Here they just kind of passed. They didn't understand the saying, and they were afraid to ask him.
And they're arguing who's going to be first and all that. And he mentioned it, and that was kind of a different take. Get your perspective on that, because I never really thought of that before, where they're arguing who's going to be first, and I always assumed like who's going to be like sitting at the right hand of Jesus, when
that'll be later.
When he enters it, right? But this was, he was like, no, there's like a discussion of who's going to replace him if he's going to go. Right?
Yeah, maybe that could have been some of the conversation. Like, he's pretty explicit. He's going to die. Well, if he does die, because he's old, he's older than us, possibly.
So
He's
this
33 years old, for crying out loud.
But which is pretty old when you die at 45.
Yeah. What's interesting is this conversation happens several different times, right, throughout the text.
It's 3 to 4 times depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, it's just a lot. I was like, did they not get it? They keep asking the same question over and over again. So it's interesting.
So one of the things I wrote down here was, he had mentioned, take the time to know Jesus personally, and then he asked, do you know the gospel personally, right? And one of the couple of the questions that triggered in my mind that I thought would be fodder for discussion is, okay, we do believe the gospel. I mean, obviously, we're Christians. We've given our life to Christ. We believe the scriptures are inerrant. So, in that sense, we believe the gospel. But do we really believe the gospel? In the sense that, I was just like thinking, how different would our lives look if we truly believed and understood the gospel? Right? I mean, in aspects of like sin, right? And I think I've used this illustration before, but if I am like cooking something over an open fire and got, an iron skillet on there and it's glowing red, with heat, I believe that is going to hurt me like the dickens if I grab onto it. So I would not touch it. And if 3 guys were trying to force me to touch it, we would have a ruckus. A ruckus. How do you like that?
Ooh.
Yeah. And I would do
1970s words.
I would do everything I could to fight all of 3 of them off before I would touch it. And I would still not touch it willingly. They would have to force me to touch it. But the scriptures teach how sin is so deadly and so dangerous and so destructive. And there's been so many times in my life that I willingly walked into sin, and so it questions like, okay, if I really believe the gospel, if I really believe what the scriptures are saying, how can my life not line up with that?
Because you really believe the gospel. Like, don't forget, the gospel starts with the fact that we want sin. Our orientation to life is in rebellion to God, and that doesn't go away because we trusted in Jesus. We're being trained out of that, sanctified out of that. So I don't see that as a contradiction. I see that as evidence that I believe the gospel. I'm a fallen human being. I don't want to sin. Well, where did that come from? Now, I still do, which is still part of the reality in the gospel, that there is this tension between who I was and who I am, between the old and the new. I'm already, but not yet fully sanctified. And so there is a tension. I believe the gospel. And so I don't think that we want to make, don't take part of the gospel, take the full creation, fall, redemption, consummation as total. Anytime we break one of those pieces of the gospel message out, you end up with a bastardized version of the gospel. So I'll give you some examples. If I remove, and I don't want to thank Nancy Piercy for pointing this out many years ago, and she was a Francis Schaeffer kind of student, and she points out that there's a lot of people in our tradition, evangelical tradition, we ignore creation. We like to talk about the 7 days of creation. We like to do all that stuff, but we ignore that man was made good, very good in creation. And that we just jump straight to the fall. Every human being's a sinner. You're dastardly. You're horrible. You're evil. Look at Romans chapter 3. There's nobody that does good, not even one. And so people in the evangelical tradition walk around with, a different form of guilt trip than Catholics. Like, our guilt trip is like, we are just rotten, dirty, horrible people, which leads you to not be curious about human beings, be afraid of them, stranger danger. They're going to infect you because I don't want to go back to that. Oh my gosh, people are evil. All
it's like running away from zombies.
Right. And so now culture is evil because it's all made by evil people. There's nothing good out there. Burn it all. Let Jesus just come and burn it. Like, we need to get out there and see people saved. We need to get out there because people are going to hell. We need to go. And it's not about a relationship with God, because if you ignore creation, you ignore that we're made for the relationship with God originally. Every human being is. And that we rebel from that. And that's the problem that we're being condemned for. And now now it's all about, do I have a ticket to heaven? Do I have a ticket to hell? If we ignore creation, then it's about getting to heaven. That's a bastardization of the gospel at some level. It's generally true, but we're missing some really important pieces. The same thing is true if you're a liberal who would argue, no, humanity is made good. They focus in on that creation, like, look, humanity's good, we're great. And then they kind of like,
you were created this way.
yeah, you bypass the fall. Nothing's wrong with you. We don't want to, that's not how this is. And
Just
so
let
Jesus
society
is a
telling
great
you.
model. If we will walk in Jesus' way and walk in his resurrection model, we'll bring heaven on earth. That's a bastardization of the gospel. Let's take another one. Pentecostals and a lot of like, I would say charismatic movements will do what we call an over-realized eschatology. They focus on the consummation. We are saved and sanctified and transformed.
therefore you should be
and
healed.
The power of the resurrection is with us, and everyone should be healed, and everyone should be changed, and there's nothing evil in this world anymore because Jesus has resurrected and transformed us. We are living in his resurrection. And so you've got some creation thought, maybe definitely some fall thought, but it's all on this like, no, we're not sanctifying, we're not transforming. How dare you sin? That's a problem in you. You're not trusting in the power of Jesus enough, which is kind of true, but not true. It's a bastardization of the gospel. And so I think the enemy plays this game with us so that we don't see the full picture, the full orb of the message that human beings have goodness in them and about them, that not everything in culture created by a human being is bad. In fact, God made human beings before there was a Christianity to do good. And they were still doing good even after the fall, even though we did it in rebellion to God. And so then you do all that nuance or whatever you want, but we do owe God a great debt because we've used his world, we've ignored his relationship, we've sinned against him, we've shoved him out, and all God's wanted was a relationship with us as we imaged him in creation. And so Jesus comes in, and then that transformation saves us through his work of the cross, pays our debt. He shows us how to live. He gives us the Spirit. He empowers us to live. Now we're transforming in sanctification. We're already saved, but not yet. We're already transformed, but not yet. And we look forward to a consummation one day where it'll all be over. And so we pray, Jesus, come soon. We're in the middle of the story, not at the end. And so, again, that was a long diatribe just to kind of say, like, I want to be careful that when that question's asked, that we hold the whole of the gospel, because I do think, man, what I'm challenged in is like, okay, what part of the gospel is God trying to apply to my life today, right? It's like, I believe the gospel, but do I really truly believe the gospel? And so I have to ask myself, do I really truly believe the gospel? Do I really think that people outside the church are really good? If I did really believe the gospel, do I find good in the culture and the world around me? Or is everything horrible and evil and going to hell? If I really believe the gospel, do I wonder at humans and want to get to know them, or do I push them away because I'm scared? When I wonder at the gospel, do I know that? Am I surprised when somebody tells me they're a sinner? Am I shocked and horrified to find out that you're sleeping around with people? Oh my gosh. Or do I kind of just go, welcome to the club of humanity? Am I judgmental? Like, that's the kind of thing that I would say, like, do I really believe the gospel applies now in a ton of different ways, right? So I like your question, but it clarified your question.
Okay. And there was a lot of fish poop in that.
What do you mean?
Bass turds.
Yeah, sorry. Bastardization.
Yes. All right.
Oh, boy. You put your joke in the middle of today.
I
You have
did.
to dig deeper than 4 minutes now.
So if you're listening at the 12-minute mark,
Try 25. No.
and so part of that is, and I wrestle with the other aspects too, is like, if I really trust Christ for my salvation, really trust the gospel, and really trust, then why do I deal with anxiety? If I really trust him, why do I deal with anxiety? Why do we hold on to grudges? It's just, we're fallen people, man.
Yes, we are.
I'm an evangelical. We're fallen. We're disgusting, dirty people.
I got so many good things on us, too. We're dirty diamonds. Just kidding.
All right. So another question, and you guys pipe in if you have more, because I didn't have a whole lot going on here, but, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. Just the passages later on when it's talking about, and And I do have a question from Jacob when it comes to this passages too. So, it's talking about the temptations to sin. Whoever, it's verse 42, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. And if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life crippled than with two hands and go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life lame than to go have 2 feet and go to hell. And then it talks about where the worm doesn't die.
And the fires are not quenched.
So I want to talk about the fires not quenched, the worm not dying, but also this part about getting your hands cut off, your eyes gouged out, your foot cut off, etc. One of the things, when we were discussing it and you brought up the passage and read it, I was like, okay, and what is that called when you absolutely remember something to be true? The
tip of your tongue, or
Mandela effect.
Oh, you think
right?
it's true, but it's not.
You think it's true. You think it's really there, and then you realize it's not. Right?
Why? What was this one?
Because I've always thought, and I thought, okay, well, you gave me the thing about enter life with one hand, right? And I always thought it was enter into heaven with one hand or one eye, rather than go to hell with both of them. And I thought, okay, well, that's all right. I guess it does say that here in Mark. I thought it was like the New Living Translation, and then I looked at this one, and it's there. I thought, okay, well, that's Mark then. And I went to Matthew and looked it up, and it's there too. And I'm like, I could have sworn it said enter heaven with one hand, or go to hell with both of them. So I want to get into the fire and the worm in just a minute. But somebody asked a question. And he was talking about, if you cut off your hand, if you gouge out your eye, would it be restored when you go to heaven? And granted, this is hyperbole. It's not telling you to necessarily rip out your eyes and cut off your limbs. But I think his thing is people that are born without a hand or something like that. Would that hand be restored when they get to heaven, do you think?
Yes, it'll be there.
It'll be there?
If you actually cut it off.
I don't think you should cut it off.
It's not a literal translation. This is the problem with the word, my least favorite word in Christendom is the word literal. I don't think
he's talking from the passage standpoint. I think he's talking about if you had an amputation.
So let's go with this. Okay, so there was a man in church history who took this extremely literally.
Yeah, this is Origen.
Oh,
so boy.
Origen, however you say his name. I'm not great at the ancient
Latin
terms or whatever his name was, but he literally took this so seriously he castrated himself.
Yeah, I think with like a brick.
I hope not.
Yeah.
But that just got the E rating.
Yeah.
So let's ask: is Origen going to be whole when he gets to heaven? I don't think that the body isn't going to be in its resurrection, returned to its original state. Some people will go, well, what about the wounds of Jesus? Like they were there, like the scars are there, and there's debate over whether those are memorial scars, whether those will be present. But there's a tendency to believe that it's made new, it's renewed. If there's any scars, they're not going to affect you except to give you glory. So I don't think that if there is like physical scars like that, that if it wasn't really right for his glory, it's not really going to be there. But you'll come back with your full self. Yeah, I think there's no reason the hand won't be there. Maybe there'll be a scar where your hand was if you did that. But
yeah, he took the passage about eunuchs seriously, according to this internet search I did. So it wasn't a brick, but it was. From a guy, Espius is the one that lived with them and reported that was what he did. So,
dude was it? And on the side note, the dude was a genius, but he was just like took it. If you really believe the gospel, Brent,
yeah, I know.
It is
scary.
It is debated though. It says so. Some scholars don't believe that that's true. So, we'll see.
Oh, really?
Yeah. However, some scholars debate accuracy of this count.
Yeah.
Many argue Origen's theology, which emphasized allegorical interpretations of Scripture, would have contradicted this literal understanding of Matthew 19, where you cut off your...
Yeah, but he actually did believe in a literal. He just believed in
Yeah.
it as the lowest form of the understanding. So
And when Origin's in heaven and he's talking to Abraham's servants, and they're going, dude, I thought what they asked me to do was bad.
Heaven. So you're telling me
real, that's very.
I don't think that's circumcision. I think you got that wrong.
This is
Well, you would know.
this is boy humor. All right. So you wanted to kind of talk about the worm and the
So
fire.
what's weird to me is so he's quoting from the LSB, which is a translation from NASB, correct?
LSD?
No, LSB.
Okay.
Isn't it the Lexham?
It just says LSB. Yeah. So I don't know if that's a Lexham is study Bible. I don't know what that would be. LSB.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I looked it up. It's based off of the NASB. But anyway, some transcripts have it here. In fact, even in the parentheses, says the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched, and it's 3 times mentioned in the text. The worm was not die, and the fire is not quenched. So the question becomes, where does this come from? With the worm does not die. I've actually heard whole sermons preached on this, where they believe hell is a literal place where you're, in the sense of you're on fire and there are worms eating you, and that's what hell is. And they'll talk about the literalness of avoiding that. And so,
Okay, so Legacy Bible is an updated version of the 1995 update of the NASB.
NASB, yeah.
So they call it the Legacy Standard Bible.
so I think it put it in ours. If you look at your ESV, you didn't read it. It's probably in your parentheses at the bottom there. But it's just about manuscripts and stuff. But whether it is in the Bible, and it does come from, you're talking about Isaiah mentioning it, because this verse is a quote from Isaiah when it's talking about this same kind of punishment of being placed outside of the Jerusalem, and it's talking about punishment. Even in Isaiah where it's used, it is using it metaphorically to talk about those that are in the kingdom and those that are outside of the kingdom in punishment.
Well, yeah, and we need to say this because most people, I want you to note, it goes Mark 9:43, Mark, and in the ESV instead of it'll go Mark 9:45. It skips 44.
Yeah.
And just to read from the Net is a translation Bible. It's used by scholars who are doing mission work and stuff like that. Most later manuscripts have 9:44 here and 9:46 after verse 45, where their worm never dies and their fire is never quenched, which is identical to verse 48, where it still is.
That's great. I didn't even realize that when.
Yeah, you read it out.
Yeah, and I was like, how come I didn't come to that verse? And I'm looking, and I'm like, oh, there is no 44 verse, and there is no 46 verse.
I just don't want to freak people out when you come to this.
Yeah, verses 44 and 46 are present in a certain set of manuscripts, but lacking in what they call the Alexandrian, which is considered the older set, and and a whole ton of others of the papyri. And so, and just so people know what I'm talking about, there are these giant codexes or sections of codexes, which are like folded books like we own today.
The invention of book.
Yeah. And then there are papyri, which are scrolls that we found in Oxyrhynchus out in Egypt. And those are considered the older manuscripts. And when we discover these, we can compare. And as we compare them, we go like, oh, what's going on here? And I was trained in college, so it's not something I don't know. It's called historical criticism, or a textual criticism is the other concept. And what's going on is that there's some rules that you follow, like why would this be there, except that, maybe it was part of a lexicon, part of something you prayed all the time. It was in a different text. So this appears to be a scribal addition from verse 48, and it's almost certainly not an original part of the Greek text of Mark. The present translation follows the Nestle-Aland 27, omitting the verse number, procedure also followed by number of other modern translations. So just so you know, it's not that we don't know it's there, just Bible translators who form your Bible decide that, we're going to go with the oldest text on this one because there's no good reason other than it was lifted up to try to make it symmetrical and make it sound good. And here's the thing about everybody out there on the internet who wants to say, hey guys, your Bible's corrupted. Look,
they're taking verses out.
Yeah, number one, we are only removing verses but telling you we remove them. Number two, they are there because Christians are extremely, extremely conservative about our Bibles, which means that if we're not sure whether it should be there or not, we typically leave it in. We don't even like to change translations in the sense of like what words we use, like the word apostle, to improve because we're so conservative. And that's not even like, that's just a straight over movement, transliteration of the word that would be an envoy or a messenger that with official capacity. And so we don't as Christians even like to change words. So if anybody's ever telling you, oh my gosh, there's all this stuff missing, no, we know about it, and it's there originally. It's there because we've kept all these accretions of editions over the years because we just were like, well, I don't want to lose it if it's the real one. Mm-hmm. So we now have apparatuses that help us understand the differences.
It is either way. Why do you think it was added, and not
why do you think it's there originally?
Yeah. In other words, because I know it's a quote of Isaiah, and we're talking about Isaiah 66, which is talking about the worm, and so maybe that's why it's been added.
Yeah, the Isaiah. Why do I think Isaiah 66 is being quoted?
Why do you think it's being quoted in Mark about the worm? Why do you think some earlier manuscripts wrote it in there? Why do you think they?
I think it just it emphasizes the horror of hell. Prophets like to use imagery to give you a sense of, kind of revulsion. Mm-hmm. Worms are gross. And when we're talking about a worm here, we're talking about probably the larvae of a fly, in some sense. We're talking about
maggots.
Maggots, right?
We're talking about maggots.
That's actually literally the translation could be maggot, where the maggot never dies and the fire is never quenched.
We're talking about dead bodies,
right? And we're talking about a dump. I don't know if you've ever accidentally left rotting meat in your like out in a hot day in the summer inside of your garbage can. I've had that happen because I have kids. Yeah. There are maggots, lots of worms just show up all over the place because the flies get to it, and boom. So this is to revulse you. It's to cause you to go, oh. But people want to take it literally in the sense like, oh, hell is filled with maggots and hell is filled with fire. We got to step back because we got to remember that the word hell should this is one of those terms I think that should be retranslated back. We used
Hades.
This is Gehenna.
This is Gehenna.
This is Gehenna.
Yeah.
And so this was a term that meant the Valley of Hinnom. And Ricky got into this a little bit, which is important. Mm-hmm. The Valley of Hinnom was a space where people burned children, and eventually the Israelites, in repentance, they removed the Baals, they removed all that stuff, and they used it as a dump heap where they put the refuse in. And look, when you threw something out in the ancient world, it had to be useless. You reused most things. Like we're a disposable society. They didn't have giant dumps. You could have a dump and they would burn it, and they would be burning refuse. They'd be burning leftover, food. They'd be burning maybe some clothing that was like soiled or something like that they couldn't clean. But they did not like have a throwaway world like we do.
Yeah. So you had to make use for it until it was absolutely
no use. And then it went to then you probably reused even parts of it because you didn't want that wood to go to waste, or you burned it but what went to a dump was the ultimate, the discard, the things that couldn't be fixed. That's why the Bible likes to use the word destroyed.
Yeah.
And so what's happening here is I think this is here for the sake of emphasis, that this is a judgment. This is a place where the dump, it's never going to stop. It doesn't end. So it's giving the eternal sense of hell. I hate that thought that there's an eternal sense of hell. But this is one of those texts that gives you a sense of the eternality of the punishment. God will not destroy his image, and therefore he will allow human beings to exist, and I view it as a consistent degradation of themselves. Fire destroys, worms disintegrate and eat things. In other words, whatever hell is, what we are becomes more and more devolved. I think we would have used, if he had spoken today, he would say, where everything devolves, where everything is destroyed and devolves. So we just get this picture of this becoming more brutish and more twisted and animalistic and violent, and it becomes less and less and less a place of any kind of real human existence.
I do know Mark is quoting Isaiah 66, which talks about the worm not dying, and in that is a future idea that in the future God's going to punish his enemies, and that he's going to make Gentile priests inside. He's talking about all this in Isaiah, and then he's talking about that as a metaphor. It says, it shall come to pass that from the new moon to another, and from the Shabbat or Sabbath to another, all flesh will become and will bow down before me, says Yahweh. And then they leave. They will look upon the corpses of the people who rebelled against me, for their worm will not die and their fire will not be quenched, and they will be horror to all flesh. So he's creating this ugly picture of those that have been punished by God who are dwelling in this place, right? Well, everyone else is like, oh, you look at that as a warning, so they're talking about Gehenna and the hell. So Jesus is bringing it back up again. I think that's why some scribes are writing it down. They're trying to make the connection to Isaiah.
Especially when you understand many scribes, they had one particular sin. They joined the monasteries to fight in many ways, which was sexual sin. I mean, why would you do a vow of celibacy if you weren't really like, I want to be free of this kind of a thing? They viewed sex as like the worst kind of sin you could possibly do. They didn't sanctify it. They didn't honor it. To this day, there's a lot of evidence that that's not the route the Bible really wanted you to go. But it wouldn't be surprising then that when they say your hand caused you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life crippled than have two hands and go into hell, into the unquenchable fire. And so they're looking at that going like, oh, we gotta up it even more. Like I think they're just trying to raise the stakes of like, don't get caught in this. Do whatever you can to fight. I don't think it loses anything either way. But it's definitely, the idea is it'd be better to do everything you can on earth to fight sin than to wind up in hell because you wanted to do whatever you wanted to do. You wanted to live whole, whatever that is. That doesn't mean to actually
gain the whole world and lose your soul.
Right. I like to say, in a sense, you want to be limping on earth. If you got a limp because you got to shut off your computer or throw out your phone and be the weirdo who has a flip phone, better to own a flip phone on earth than to end up in hell and have had a glorious time with your smartphone. Better to have given away all your money and live as a poor person than to have had it keep you out of the kingdom of God. Like that's what I think he's getting at. Not just sexual sin here. This is very definitely a life of being willing to live for Jesus, of willing to suffer for sanctification's sake. And I don't think that in a comfortable American society we like to suffer for sanctification's sake. Anybody here with me on that one? Mm-hmm. Brent, do you like to suffer for sanctification's sake?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Tell me about it.
I'm one of the rare ones.
He's a glutton for punishment?
Yeah, but I am
give me more.
Pretty evolved in the sanctification realm, so suffering is really not that great anymore because I've already pursued full righteousness. Wow. You don't want to sit too close to me.
Yeah. Dude, either the lightning's going to strike or I'm going to excommunicate you, one or the other. But
yes. No. No, we don't like to suffer.
It's righteousness is your glutton for, not narcissist.
That's right. Narcissism is,
But let's play a C.S. Lewis game for a second. Like, if this was the Screwtape Letters, what do you think the demons would be doing to fight off this idea that sanctification is like Jesus calling us to suffer for sanctification's sake? What would their game be for a modern world to negate that concept?
I mean, if you're not reading the scriptures where Jesus says you will suffer, I would think that one of the things that people think is God wants you to live a comfortable, happy life, and.
But isn't that a little too obvious, right? It's like for some people maybe not, but it's like, oh, I'm talking about like for the Christian, it's like, oh, okay, God doesn't want me to really live comfortable. He doesn't want me to cut off my hand, but he doesn't really want me to live
uncomfortably,
fully like a comfortable life. I get that. I mean, he's not asking me to really be super comfortable. So then what's the game? How is it that the enemy is still hindering us from sanctification then? Because I do see a lot of people, like you're saying, they would disagree. Like, oh, okay, yeah, God doesn't want us to live comfortably. But they still, if they only believe the gospel, what would...
Yeah, and I see it probably most evidently when somebody hits crisis, right? If someone that they love, they lose them tragically, if some crisis hits their family or hardship hits their family, granted they're grieving, which is proper, but then they get into the why. Why would God do this? And I think that those kinds of why questions kind of show that you don't necessarily believe that suffering is a part of our life, right? And I think that I think the enemy just wants us to be comfortable, happy, and distracted, and he's.
I always come back to this scene from the Holocaust movie, the Schindler's List. At the end of Schindler's List,
Don't watch the movie, but watch the end of it.
you can watch the whole movie, but like
just note, skip spots.
Yeah, there are certain
Watch
spots.
him on VidAngel.
It is there are some
Yes,
yeah,
VidAngel.
VidAngel
Good.
it, but
Right.
but the idea is that he was secretly having this very comfortable life, and that he started to sacrifice certain things to get Jews out of there and put them on this list to save them. At the end of the movie, he sees all these people that he saved at the graveside, and he's going around and he sees all these people because of what he sacrificed that made it out of the Holocaust, and he's like, I should have got rid of this. He starts taking things off of him and looking at all his stuff. He goes like, I would have saved another person. I would have saved another person. I would have saved another person. And so this idea is even though he did more than most people would have done, he's still feeling like if I had only done more people could have possibly be saved. And that's the picture I get of purposefully making yourself uncomfortable. He had no one was going to do anything to him if he just went with the status quo. He didn't have to do anything. His life was comfortable, but the evil was so great that he chose to give up his position and sacrifice it. And it's the position that we don't want to give up. So if Christ left heaven to give us something, he's coming down here. He gave up comfort. And we're like, well, that's great, but I don't want to get off the couch, you know? So it's this juxtaposition that we serve a God who gave up everything, didn't consider it something that was less than himself to go out and put himself in a very harmful position. Most of us would not contemplate the ability to do that or be creative enough to find a place to do that because of the fact that it would get in the way. And I think that's the little trick of comfort, is the devil is lying and saying, does God really want you to suffer? I mean, it seems like bad to put yourself in a harmful situation, but that's not what Schindler was doing. He wasn't like, I'm putting myself in a harmful situation because I want to feel good about myself. He's like, no, I'm literally trying to save people from death, right? And so if you really believe that God saves people from death, then you are willing to give up certain comforts because the goal of the sacrifice is greater than my own comfort. And this is true of anyone who accomplishes anything. There's a hardship to it. You have to run if you want to be a runner. You have to work out if you want to be a boxer. It's same thing with the text seems to indicate. If you really want to be a gospeler, you have to know the gospel enough. It has to sacrifice in some point in your life, and it has to be difficult in the sense that you're choosing to give this up because you see a greater reason to do so. So it's a lack of vision. And sometimes I think when you're wealthy, you have too many things distracting you to see a vision of, hey, what if I got rid of this and did that? Would that glorify you, Father?
But
do it.
Even more, I think that is just the idea of getting you dwelling on suffering because we live in a generally comfortable society.
Yeah, medically comfortable.
And we have literally an attention that pulls us about ourselves. And so Jesus here is not talking even about salvation of people. He's talking about your own progress in spiritual development.
To get closer to him.
I kind of want to retranslate this for us in one way. Let me read it this way, see if this changes anything. It says, if anyone causes one of these little ones who trusts in me to rebel against me, it would be better for him to have a huge millstone, a giant tractor tied around his neck and thrown into the sea. If your hand causes you to rebel against me, cut it off. It's better for you to enter into the relationship with me forever crippled than to have two hands and go into a forever life apart from me, to the unquenchable fire. If your foot causes you to rebel against me, cut it off. It's better for you to enter into this life where you're with me forever lame than to have 2 feet and be thrown into the place where you're never with me ever again. If your eye causes you to rebel against me, so I mean, you get this idea of, you put it in the relational terms.
Yeah.
You get this like sense of like, he's saying like, do what I just want you to stay with me. Like, I'd rather you limp next to me. I'll carry you. I'll do whatever than to lose because you wanted to save something in your life. You wanted some other thing. You wanted to push me away. That to me is like, sometimes the easiest thing to do is get you so familiar with the words.
Oh yeah.
That we don't weigh the costs in the words, right? So it's just like, man, do I really want to walk with Jesus, that I would be willing to do whatever I need to try to keep sin out of my life? And my soul says yes. Like,
There's a part of you that says yes.
Yes.
There's
And
another
then
part
when
of
you
you
hit
that
the
says,
suffering, you have to reevaluate. But man, when I'm in my right mind, yes, I'm willing to put anything I need to on a computer, anything I need to remind me, what do I need to do? What do I need to chop out? What do I need to give away? Like, I want to follow you. And then he'll challenge you even further, because I do think that there's levels of sanctification. There's development. So.
Now, I'm not endorsing self-harm. I want to say that to, avoid any lawsuits or anything.
Thank you.
But you're looking at these passages, right? And we would say this is a literal truth, but a figurative solution, right? So why would it not be a literal truth and a literal truth?
Well, I would say it's a literary truth in the sense that this is hyperbole. Rabbis use this kind of concept all the time. Hate your father and mother, love me. This is hyperbole. He's using the extremities to reveal the point. I think the literal truth is, or if we were to reach behind the text to the truth, it is do whatever you can to fight sin in order to walk with me. Like, do extreme things that look like it's going to hold your life back to follow me. That might be giving away all your possessions, as he calls one guy to do, as we'll see in a couple weeks. It may be like, don't own a cell phone. Be the weirdo. You don't, like, I've known people to fight sexual sin in their life because they were sex addicts who he literally would not go. A woman asked for help in a parking lot because her car was broken, and it was just him and her left. He ignored her, got in his car, and drove away. Because he was like, for the sake of my wife and my marriage, I can't even broker a conversation. And he's like, I feel horrible, but this is the extreme I had to go to in order to get my wife safe, to know that I was standing with my boundaries, that I was doing the things I said I would do. She got home, but it was like, did he feel guilty? Yeah, but at the same time, he's just like, this is the level I had to go to for the relationship. And I think that's the kind of stuff we're talking about.
Okay. All right. So we are running short on time now. So you want to get into the questions?
Sure.
All right. So we've got 3 questions. I'm not 100% sure if we'll get through all 3 of them today. But this first one comes from somebody who emailed us. And the email address is Valued Decoder. There's more. I didn't necessarily want to share it all online. But Valued Decoder. And I will say, dude, whoever you are, you've sent us 2 now. This first one that we're going to read is your oldest one, and I think you sent it on the 1st of June. We had it, and then for some reason we didn't get to it, and then it kind of got dropped. So I want to pick that up.
Sorry.
But I also want to do this. You obviously are listening to the podcast. You've sent in questions twice. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. I have no idea who you are. I even went to look through our database and put your email address in there, and so obviously we don't have it as a church. So I would love for you to email us and let us know who you are. We'd love to start a relationship with you. Let us know even if you go to the church. So anyway, he sent us a clip of a Instagram short, and he said, I found this IG story about dating, and I thought I'd share it to hear more from TRTP. Dig that. The Rabbit Trail Podcast. Yeah. Boom, chakalaka. I like that. So see attached. So we watched the video. He says, is this true? Did the word dating start because of prostitution? Is it true that dating is not in the Bible? Follow-up question. I heard you mention arranged marriages on different podcasts. Arranged marriages have been around for centuries and were used for many different reasons. Can you bullet point some examples of why arranged marriages were necessary? And what are the ways that arranged marriages have been abused in the Bible? All right. So, who wants to start off?
Who wants to start?
So, all right, I'll start.
Oh,
so
okay.
I did do a quick check, and about like the 1800, 1900, 20th century, the word dating being a euphemism for, and I think that was the word they used in the video, a euphemism for prostitution. And it did say, well, in some of the, research I did, if you want to call it research, Googling I did, basically said, that was a term. It was basically put on a calendar, the date, but people would have dates, and then that would be, in exchange for things, and so it was affiliated with prostitution. I didn't see anything that said it was solely attributed to prostitution as well. But I will say, that was 100 years ago. And so I kind of was thinking about some other words, because again, if we're talking about dating now and it's linked to prostitution somewhat loosely 100 years ago, it doesn't mean the same thing. So when you're bringing it up, it's not comparing apples to apples. So just one of a couple of things I thought was kind of funny was 100 years ago, the word computer, was basically describing a person, not a thing, a person who did calculations. And then, as NASA was developing, they would be a computer for NASA. And that was a person doing mathematical equations for that. If you heard the word computer now, you would not think, oh, that's a person who does mathematical equations. You would absolutely 100% think
it was a box or some kind of a device.
Video box, right? The
not
word
anymore. No one would think it was a box nowadays, right?
Yeah, not a box, a little laptop.
A little flat thing.
The word awful, 100 years ago was full of awe, inspiring, where the word awful now is like, ooh, gross.
Dude,
yeah?
Well, anyway,
Yeah.
I want to talk about what a dude is.
Huh? The word's cool.
The opposite of a dudette.
It was a temperature, then it became, it became me. That's what it became.
Oh.
Tablet. Those were like flat stones. It was tablets. You think of the Ten Commandments written on stone tablets. And now when you think of tablets, you think of a smaller computer that you carry around in your hand. So I think the word is kind of, the word is not as meaningful or connected.
Words are fungible.
To that.
Just kidding.
Yeah, they change meanings. So
what's funny is I asked, just for fun, I asked ChatGPT the exact question that was asked. And I asked it, first I said, is dating, does it have the origin? And it's like, no. And I asked, is the word
connected?
Yes. And so it's like, the point is that there is an association back there, but it is not so strongly linked that it had only to do with prostitution.
Just think about the word. The word meant putting something on a calendar that two people are arranging. Then it became linked to a romantic encounter. That could both be going on a date with someone for platonic marriage reasons, or if you're a prostitute and you wrote a date, then you would sign that for a time that you're meeting one of your
people
clients.
And what was hard about this is that people started viewing that as an economic exchange.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going out on a romantic thing with you and buying your dinner or buying your meal. And so, hey, that's what you do with a prostitute, pay for something, right?
Yeah.
So that was the association some people were trying to make.
Yeah.
That's not what dating is.
Not what it is.
Maybe today it is, because everything seems to be free prostitution and a hookup culture in some ways. There's unfortunate realities in the younger generations that, especially in college levels, that there is just this kind of like, hey, even people trying to have sex without feelings, like as if it's like, let's go get coffee or we can hang out and have sex. Like, it's like,
yeah.
And I know people that brag, and it doesn't have to be a sexual aspect of it, of that transactional date, but I've seen stories of girls who promote going on dates to get a free dinner, and not a sexual transaction, but I can go and get a free meal.
Well, it does require you to be nice to the person, but I just think that this is still, even when it was first used both ways in the 1900s, it was related to romantic notions, same to the word courtship. So you can't divorce it from the same kinds of time periods that these are coming out of. So courtship needed to be ritually arranged. So you would set up dates, even if the parents were involved or not. So this is just a pet peeve of mine, because when I was a singles minister, the idea of dating was always sinful, and they were always looking
that
for...
That was back with the kissing, dating,
yeah,
goodbye, right?
But courting was somehow this idealized biblical model, and I'm just like, this is not how they did it. Even in The Victorians, the way they did it, had a lot of economic reasons why they wanted certain people to court certain people. They didn't want you courting outside of your particular class, and each class had its own kind of reputation.
Particular ethnicity.
So we don't glorify the
But
past.
also courting was more supervised than
because they wanted to control
because
it.
they wanted to control it, not because they wanted it to be pure. You know what I mean? Like so this is my problem, is that we keep trying to find these historic sinful reasons why it's not biblical. Well, Victorian era is not biblical at all. These concepts about dating don't match the biblical text, which is people arranged marriages. So he did bring up arranged marriages in the question. It's just that things change over time, and you have to apply biblical principles to things. If the idea of finding a spouse is the intent of a young man or young woman, they should do it in a way that brings glory to God, and different cultures are going to do that different ways.
Now I will say the courting thing, right?
Yeah.
You said it wasn't for purity's sake, all right? Against my will,
Yeah.
I have watched enough Jane Austen movies to know that courting was about purity. People were watching them, and they had to be pure.
Actually,
and so again, I'm going
A lot
by
of these-
the
you're going by the
inerrancy
BBC.
of Jane Austen.
Going by the BBC's version
my
of Jane
wife has
Austen.
forced me to watch.
I hate to inform you, Jane Austen hated the concept of courting, and she wrote her romance novels as a direct opposition to the concept of
What it did to people.
of what
kinda-
courting was creating, which
Yeah.
was these hierarchies of pride and prejudice. That's why the term is. That's why Darcy ends
Yeah.
up, spoiler alert, marrying Elizabeth.
I was
who
going to
is
watch it tonight.
of a totally different class. I love that movie, but anyway, the BBC version of a totally different class. He's supposed to have married. You see the pride and the prejudice that's occurring in both class settings, where the moms and families like kind of lowball and weird, and he's willing to break through the striations and as almost like a Christ character,
Right.
which she meant him to be, somebody who came from heaven and humbled himself to save Elizabeth and her family, to bring about this transformation. And then what does he do? Brings her home as a bride and gives her the world. Like this, he is a Christ figure in that. So I promote Pride and Prejudice as a good.
All right,
as a
maybe we'll do it
good
as a play then.
movie. So, but
For Mother's Day.
It's a Hallmark movie. For crying out loud, it's a Hallmark movie.
way better than a Hallmark movie.
I think it predates the Hallmark a little
Oh,
bit.
yeah, I think it set up the bad versions of Hallmark movies because it's a good movie. Anyway, so it's a good. Never mind.
Story. It's a good story. It's a good novel.
Who am I? So that's like
You're somebody who likes musicals too.
I love musicals.
Ah.
All right, so
But I am crushed. Just a follow-up question. I'd love to know what you're thinking through the process of dating, because I do think the church needs to have a concept of what is the social responsibility the church has to help young people find a bride or a groom, and what does that look like, and what's the purpose of it?
I do agree that our culture got as we've gotten so individualistic, we've just tossed it on kids to figure it out. And now we're in a world where how do you even find out? I really recommend reading books like Boundaries in Dating. Very helpful. There's a lot of newer things on how to be like how to engage in a romantic connection. And guess what? There are many young ladies starving for a man just to be kind, come approach, ask them out, and pay for the meal. And like one of the funniest things, if you want to watch a good example of how to set somebody up well for dating, watch Love on the Spectrum on Netflix. They give these kids with autism and Down syndrome and stuff dating advice, and they send them on a date. Now, obviously, it's like, well, they're kind of being courted because they got the video on them, and some of them mess it up. But it's cool to watch some of the young Christian guys and others do it so well and caring for somebody. And we've been like, just, hey, boys, watch this. These are basics. This helps even a relationship between two autistic people have a good date because it works no matter who you are as a human. These are those kinds of things. I like that stuff.
I do think relationships are not an individualized things. People who are married seek the help of the church to help them when they grow in their marriage after. So why wouldn't they do it before as well? So the idea that your marriage is so just you and the other person that it has nothing to do with its impact on the community. I'm not saying there isn't any exclusivity. I'm just saying that like no one does anything as an island. If you get divorced, people pay for it. The courts, we all are participating in that. What leads to juvenile delinquency is oftentimes related to a lack of a father figure. And so all of this stuff has a social impact. So I do think socially we have a right to speak into the institution of marriage. And the church, I think, does this well on when people are married, but before it seems to kind of drop off to me. So,
and for me personally, and I raised 2 girls, and and I did raise them in the era of I Kissed Dating Goodbye, which I did not find that book and give it to them. They found it, and they were,
and they gave it to you, and you're like, you will help me.
They thought this was good stuff. There's a lot of falseness in that I don't agree with, but I do agree with this. In one part of the perception was, when we think of dating, we think of a couple going off by themselves and spending time together, getting to know each other, kind of away from everybody and just having that personal connection. We think of courting, or at least, from that standpoint, is a couple getting together, but they're getting together in groups where they can get to know each other, get to know each other's friends. It's more of a social getting to know each other. And then so there's pushback on one, no, that's it. And there's pushback on the other, no. It's like whatever you choose, but understand that the coming together as a couple and getting to know each other and moving forward to possibly getting married or whatever, it's about honoring God through the whole process, right? So, if you're in the dating camp and it's like, we want to spend a lot of time alone, just make sure that you have some guardrails in there, some safety valves in there, that you're not going to give in to temptation and do things that would not honor God. So, just going into that and having those clear directives in your relationship. If you find that you can't be sexually pure when you're on your own, then have some accountability in there and, don't put yourself in a position to fail.
So I just want to step way back off the brink here. I think we over-sexualize dating, and we just did it again. Like, we legitimately, need to return to dating is not a relationship. I think if you've moved past the casual encounter of a date, like 2 or 3 dates, and you want to have a relationship, now I do think there's a little bit more what we consider a courting reality. You should be going to each other's homes. You should be meeting each other's families. You should be connecting with their communities. You should be going to their churches. You shouldn't be just in this distant. A date, 2 dates, 3 dates, 4 dates should be established enough that you can go like, I don't really want this person in my life. There's no way you should be just, and look, a person with their head on their shoulders, a young lady or a young man who's looking to get married, likely isn't going to go on a date and go have sex. Now, it happens, but I'm talking in the church setting. I really, they're going to come home and have to explain themselves to their parents. They're going to have to come home and be a part of their community. Yeah. They got youth pastors that are going like, hey, how did that go? What happened? And so I think we overemphasize the fear of sex and dating. And we forgot that, we should be involved setting church functions, making picnics, making sure that there's dances and balls. Oh, you can't dance. Like, come on, folks. Like, we killed dancing. It used to be something that was propagated in a culture as ballroom dance, like dancing in pairs and couples. And now it's mosh pit dancing. Like there's no connection between two people having to have a conversation while dancing platonically. No. So this is stuff that we need to grasp, return to, engage with, or people are going to continue to flounder and wonder, like, what do I do? How do I do this? Now, he did ask a question about arranged marriages. And arranged marriages is an ancient thing in a tight-knit community that, again, was oftentimes related to your religion, trying to keep your religious and ethnic purity involved in your tribe, involved in your group. You were often arranged by a family that already knew each other. You lived in villages. Like, a village was not a city. Even in cities, you lived in enclaves within the city and knew the people directly around you. You knew the other merchants. You knew the other servants in a community. So when you lived in a village where most of this arranged marriage stuff was happening, that would be, you were marrying your like second or third cousin. You were keeping it even in your family because that village was your family. And so you had this very tight-knit connections where you were brought together and there was love that would develop oftentimes in the betrothal period where your parents had come together to officiate this kind of connection. And they weren't going against your will, but they were considering, do you like him? Is he someone you can live with? Because they don't want him. Like, I don't know a dad who wanted his daughter unhappy. Like, then what would happen
You'd be
if
a
the
bad
daughter's
father.
unhappy?
There are bad fathers. But
your wife is unhappy. And if your wife is unhappy, you are unhappy. And because your mother-in-law is unhappy. And so you just, getting a good guy for your daughter is a pretty high thing, especially as a dad who wouldn't want your daughter hurt. You got to remember, human beings are pretty much the same. And so we would arrange these marriages out of a deep set of community. Reason arranged marriages don't really work today and aren't even attempted,
at least not in American culture.
In American culture, is because we don't have a culture that's that tight knit. Even the churches are not connected in a community to know all the Christians. It'd be great to have multi-church events where we're having dates and things and times to get together to meet, because there are tons of Christians that people don't even know. And then are you really a Christian? All that stuff gets mixed. But arranged marriages were practiced for a lot of that consideration. It wasn't that the Bible is endorsing them, and it wasn't that that's just how it was. In fact, we would argue, as women gained more rights and more seeking of what the Bible says to look for love, to have love, that birthed romantic period in a lot of these places, as other forms of arrangement were being abused. And so, and even arranged marriages were abused. They would be abused for the sake of racism. They would be abused for the sake of financial gain. They would be abused and the prejudice, power, influence. They would cause divorces in order to bring up more power. So arranged marriages are not necessarily the coup de grace, including the fact that Joe Hellerman, one of my professors, pointed out that in the time period, you were less connected emotionally to your spouse than you were to your brothers and sisters. You viewed marriage as a covenant in which you were to have marital right. You had your marital rights. You were supposed to have sex. So why? The husband is giving. She's supposed to give him she's supposed to receive pleasure. He's supposed to receive children. And she wants children too. So there's connection. Children often were the ones who protected women who got into old age because they would care for their moms, because the dad usually died younger. But other issues that were involved in there is that you had your brothers and sisters that you would go to holiday with. You didn't stay home and have a holiday party. Dad took the kids to his house with his family, and mom went and hung out with her brothers and stuff. And so there was this weird, different route, and a lot of that was done together anyway in small villages. It's just a different world. You can't even compare it to what we're going through. And so that's what I'm having a hard time kind of expressing or explaining, because the culture is just diametrically opposite of what we experience.
But it doesn't mean you can't apply biblical principles to what would be God honoring. So. Which it transcends. That's why I don't think This Is How You Date, chapter 5, is a book, right? It's because God knew things would change, so he has principles on how to treat.
Don't awaken love before it's time.
Yeah.
Be a man of God. Be focused on that. Serve. Don't seek to be served. All these are romantic principles as well. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the second question from Savannah and John April. They said, "We love listening to the podcast." Thank you, Savannah and John. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights with the listeners. Here's our question from today's sermon, and that was this Sunday, right? So what is the difference between biblically judging other believers, as we are called to do, and criticizing them for their individual or specific walk with Jesus? Can you provide specific example of each to clarify? So who wants to take that first?
You go for it.
All right. So, just an initial thought, and then you guys can expound on that. For me, the difference between biblical judging other believers, as we're called to do, as you put it, number one, I think when we talk about biblically judging people, we are not talking about condemnation, but more of a confrontation of sin in their life. Like you go through Matthew 18, that is about sinful confrontation, not judging somebody. And one of the examples I could give that, and part of it too is it's a confrontation of sin with truth, with grace, and with the intention of restoration for them, not condemnation. And so one of the examples I would give on that would be is if you knew somebody that were, and you found out that if I found out the husband was cheating on his wife, I would call him aside and I would confront him about the affair that he's having. I would confront him with the fact that biblically this is wrong, and if you're saying that you're a Christian, you need to repent of this. You need to agree that this is wrong. You need to confess this. You need to get right with God. And so it would really be an aspect of confronting the sin and hoping that he would choose restoration in that. And then criticizing people for their individual or specific walk with Christ. And I would say criticizing, really, I feel like the intention of it is pride-based. It's based oftentimes on your own personal standards or your own opinions rather than Scripture, and so it's just criticizing people about their spiritual walk because it doesn't align with what you think they should be doing. Like, oh, I do my daily devotionals every day and they don't do daily devotionals. Well, then I don't think that they really have a strong relationship with God, and, you could do that about numerous things that are maybe a personal conviction of yours. And then you feel like they have to have that same personal conviction in order to be a true Christ followers. So I think criticism comes from a me-centered, pride-based, where judging somebody in that sense is coming more from a compassionate thing to restore them. So what say you?
Well, I don't know, brought up the verse, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught doing something wrong, you are directed by the Spirit to restore a person in a spirit of gentleness, looking closely at yourself so that you're not tempted also, and bearing one another's burdens. In this way, you will fulfill the law of Jesus, right? So the thing about it is we are called to help people in their relationship with other people, but the Bible says we need to self-examine why we're doing that. We're trying to bring them in closer relationship, but there's oftentimes the Bible is asking us to make an evaluation. Now, some people have a negative reaction to the word judge, and others have another negative reaction to the word criticize. Both of those can be used in different definitions. If by what you mean judge or criticize, you mean help someone who's struggling in sin or struggling with something get closer to God because you have a relationship with them, then you're doing a good thing as long as you self-evaluate. If you're going around saying that person's going to hell and that person's going to hell and they're all going to hell, that would
the worm doesn't die.
The worm doesn't die, yeah. And then that would be condemning them in a way that I don't think the Bible calls for. You're judging them, their eternal destination. So there is an idea that if you love someone, that you will express the truth to them with gentleness and respect, both for the believer, but also even for unbelievers, talking about like there is sin in the world, like I'm trying to persuade you that these things exist so that you can avoid the worm, where the worm does not die. So the idea of always just evaluating behavior is not as one who isn't guilty of it, but as one who all suffer from it, and that God is the perfect judge. And I want you to take God's, relational, his anecdote for the problem of our own sinful natures. And so you would not just let someone walk off a cliff going, well, I don't want to bug them. You would care about them and say, hey, guy, I'm worried about you. I've been where you're at. I don't want you to fall. And that is done with kindness. Now, if you're doing it with condemnation because it's fun for you, then that goes back to the whole idea of, do you remember what happened, how you got saved? You found out you were a sinner. You found out you weren't perfect. And so therefore, I need to be aware of my own sin. So I'm not condemning as one who doesn't think they have sin, but I'm one who's saying, like, I know what that struggle's like. Let me get you in right relationship with God. You help me too, because I might fall later on, and you might be the one that corrects me. So we need to care for one another, not avoid conflict. So,
oh, good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that is that. So thank you guys for sending in your questions, and thank you for just all of the feedback and just a fun conversation you helped us start. We hope that you have some other follow-up conversation you'd like to make, or maybe questions that you have for us. We would love to hear from you. You can send that to us at rabbittrail@obcc.church. That's rabbittrail@obcc.church. Woo, I'll get that right one day. But we're just glad you joined us. God bless you guys. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.